Hello students, hope you are well and safe at home. I welcome you all for this lecture on tragedy. As you know, in the syllabus of drama in English paper, there are 4 plays, and out of 4 plays, 3 plays are tragedies. One is Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, second is Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, and third play is William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. So one play is a Greek tragedy and 2 plays are classical plays belonging to the Elizabethan period. So it is important and worthwhile to know what is tragedy, definitions, characteristics, and some important types of tragedies. So in this lecture, we'll talk about all these important aspects and issues related to tragedy. Hope you will enjoy it. Let's begin our discussion by talking about the term tragedy. The term tragedy is applied to dramatic representations of serious actions which eventuate in a disastrous conclusion for the protagonist or the chief character. So in a tragedy, uh, action is not only narrated, it is performed on the stage, and it is very serious kind of an action which brings change in the fortune of the main character or in the fate of the protagonist, and this action leads to a disastrous conclusion, or the protagonist uh, meets his or her failure, and therefore it arouses pity and fear from the spectators, and we sympathize with the tragedy of the main characters. As you know that Aristotle in his book Poetics in the 4th century has discussed the term tragedy and various aspects of it in detail. Aristotle was a disciple of Plato who took over from Plato a few basic principles which form the core part of his book Poetics, in which he talks about poetry, its structure, and also about drama, and especially tragedy. He defined tragedy in the chapter number 6 and also talked about plot in the tragedy, characters, the role of plot and characters, different types of tragedies, parts of tragedies, various features of tragedies, who is protagonist, features or characteristics of the protagonist, the feelings of pity and fear, and also catharsis in the subsequent chapters. But about Aristotle's theory of tragedy or discussion on tragedy, it is argued that his theory was based only on the examples which were available to him at that time. And before Aristotle, the Greek playwrights were the prominent dramatists. The tragedies of Greek dramatists such as Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides were very popular, and therefore most of the ideas of Aristotle are based on the plays by these Greek dramatists. Aristotle, uh, in his book Poetics, has defined the term tragedy. According to Aristotle, tragedy means, I quote, the imitation of an action that is serious and also as having magnitude, complete in itself, in the medium of poetic language and in the manner of dramatic rather than of narrative presentation, involving incidents arousing pity and fear wherewith to accomplish the catharsis of such emotions. Unquote. So if you look at this definition, you could find there are some important points in his definition. And these points are that imitation of an action, serious action, magnitude and complete in itself, in the poetic language, arousing pity and fear, and catharsis. So these important points could help us to understand his definition, could help us to analyze his definition. When it is said that tragedy is an imitation of an action, the aim is to represent actual life with all its ups and downs, with different vicissitudes of life, by selecting characters who are superior to us or just like to us, all other human beings. His likes or dislikes and own action becomes the cause of his or her gradual fall from grace or from high to low position. So the imitated life is an idealization of the actual life. So it becomes convincing to us. So whatever is represented on stage, it becomes probable or might happen in everyone's life. So simultaneously, whatever is enacted on stage, it should yield pleasure by projecting the universal truth. So the protagonist performs the action, and this action may be either physical or verbal, and it becomes a serious action. The word serious is very important, which has the merit of holding or engaging the serious attention by projecting ethical and moral aspects of life. When it is said magnitude or complete in itself, Aristotle talks about its length. So the length of tragedy must be complete in itself. It means the story should cover a few years from the life of the protagonist. It must have beginning, it must have an end, it must have also middle. So something must be introduced through dialogues or through narration in the beginning of the play, which results into middle part of the play. So the middle must be a natural consequence of the preceding events that could lead to a logical conclusion or an end. So the length of the tragedy must be reasonable, that could able to show the transformation in the life of the protagonist properly, with an enough space for happening it and justifying the results of it. So each and every incident in the tragedy must be necessary and probable. When Aristotle talks about the poetic language, he must be referring to the artistic use of language, and the language, it is expected that should be artistic, that must suit to the occasion or the character and also the state of the mind. Then only it could arouses the feelings of pity and fear with regard to the protagonist. Another important point is that the action, which is very serious, not only narrated but it is performed. So the form of an action must be dramatic. It must be enacted by the character on the stage and not only narrated, except some serious or ugly situations or some difficult situations. For instance, in Sophocles' Oedipus Rex, uh, the event of Oedipus self-blinding, it is very difficult to enact on stage. So such kinds of serious or difficult situations can be narrated, but not all. So here Aristotle talks about the dramatic performances of the serious action on the stage. And this kind of a serious action, it arouses pity and fear in the minds of the spectators. You know that these are the two important emotions aroused in the tragedy. Pity is aroused from the spectator's mind uh, that the hero does not deserve such a misfortune, and fear or terror is aroused out of the misfortune that is befallen on the generally good man for his or her error. This may happen with us, disturbs us, and becomes a very painful experience for us. But simultaneously, whatever emotions are aroused, they are purified, they are removed from the minds of the readers. So Aristotle is also talking about the catharsis of such emotions. So catharsis means purification or purgation of such emotions. So when these emotions are removed from the minds of the spectators, they feel more comfortable, they feel more relaxed, and this should be one of the important purposes of the tragedy. And you know that it helps to build a healthy society. So when you look at this definition, these are the important points. Once you understand them, it becomes easier to analyze this definition. Aristotle, in his book, also defines tragic hero or the protagonist. He laid down some characteristics of the protagonist. He laid down some features of the tragic hero. And these features are that the protagonist or the tragic hero evokes our pity and fear or pity and terror. His failure makes us sad. It is also described that the tragic hero must be neither thoroughly good or nor thoroughly bad, but he should be a mixture of both, some good qualities as well as some faults or some drawbacks. And in the tragedy, his fate or his destiny is changed. So change in the fortune is resulted because of his or her mistaken choice or because of his wrong decision. So all such kinds of characteristics which are laid down by Aristotle in his book Poetics. But if you see, all the tragedies mainly focus on the protagonist, whose tragedy happens in the play. The misfortune that has befallen in the life of the protagonist, it disturbs us and also makes us very sad. Our feelings of pity and fear are aroused. But it is believed that the tragic effect is stronger when the protagonist is better than us in several other ways and also similar to us in some extent, with all moral values and also shortcomings. So this kind of a change in the fortune of the character, in the fortune of the protagonist, that is always from happiness to misery, or from you know um, grace uh, to downtrodden. All such kinds of changes occur only because of his own choice of an action, or only because of his own fault, and that is called hamartia. Literary means error of judgment or the tragic flaw. So the flaw in the character itself brings out his or her own tragedy, which is called hamartia. And in Greek tragedies, it was the common pattern, or it was the common form, which was called hubris. So the effect of the tragedy depends on how strong, how prominent is the protagonist, and how he has fallen from higher to lower state. There are different types of tragedies, and medieval tragedies are the oldest types of tragedies. About medieval tragedies, it is argued that they lacked direct knowledge of classical tragedies or direct knowledge of Aristotle's Poetics. Therefore, whatever the rules which were laid down by Aristotle, we don't find that they are followed by the medieval dramatists or followed in the medieval tragedies. Whatever rules that Aristotle developed, they were based on the available sources to him, mostly the Greek dramatists. But all the rules are not followed in the medieval tragedies. Medieval tragedies are the stories of person of high status or high rank, who either deserves or not, but their life is brought from prosperity to wretchedness by an unpredicted wheel of fortune. So there is no guarantee of its movement, in which direction either it will move. Uh, so the life of the protagonist is quite uncertain, and it is beyond the human control. So this medieval tragedies, they owe much to the native religious drama, the miracle and morality plays. You know that these miracle and morality plays were the lessons to the then society. It was a kind of a moral preaching. These stories, either from religion or either from Bible, were enacted to teach different kinds of moral values to people. So medieval tragedies are the important types of tragedies. Another oldest type or form of tragedy is Senecan tragedy. Uh, it is named after the well-known Roman writer Seneca in the 1st century, whose plays were widely known earlier than those of the Greek tragedies. The Senecan tragedies were written to be recited than to be acted. But these Senecan tragedies have provided the model for an organized 5-act plays with a complex plot and formal style of dialogue. Later, it developed into two directions, into two different main lines. First is academic tragedies, and second is the revenge tragedies. These academic tragedies, constructed according to the rules of the three unities, for example, the unity of place, unity of time, unity of action, and they also used chorus. Thomas Norton's Gorboduc is one of the best examples of an academic tragedies, written in 1562. Another important line of development of Senecan tragedy is revenge tragedies, about which we'll talk in the next slide. Revenge tragedies are also called the tragedy of blood because it derived from Seneca's very popular favorite materials of murder, revenge, ghost, mutilation, carnage are the important themes or are the important issues discussed in the tragedy. So there is a lot of bloodshed, deaths on the stage or in the play. Therefore, they are also called tragedy of blood. Thomas Kyd's The Spanish Tragedy is one of the best examples of a tragedy of blood or revenge tragedy. And in the Elizabethan period, uh, many major tragedies were written of this kind. So, in the brief time between 1585 to 1625, there were many popular playwrights, including Christopher Marlowe, William Shakespeare, Chapman, Webster, Fletcher. They wrote such kinds of revenge tragedies. Another important type of tragedy is bourgeois or domestic tragedy. Uh, it was very popular in the 18th century. And in such tragedies, the protagonists were from the middle or lower social ranks. They were from the common background and they suffered a commonplace or domestic disasters. So these tragedies are about their day-to-day routine life, regular life, in which they face a couple of problems, couple of difficulties to manage. George Lilo's The London Merchant is one of the best examples of a bourgeois or domestic tragedy. So these are the different types of tragedies, and I hope it will help you to study the tragedies which are prescribed in our syllabus. It will provide you a guideline. It will give you an idea how to analyze, how to study a play, especially tragedies. Thank you very much.